Well, this evening we want to talk about the theme of, is it possible to love everyone? And in order to do this, we have to talk about what is love and the two kinds of love that we typically experience. One is the quality of love, and that quality is a universal aspect of God. As you probably know, God manifests himself in 8 ways or 8 aspects. Just as light from the sun, if you take a prism, the prism splits that light that's a white light into the 7 colors of the rainbow. And so if we had a prism of consciousness that could split the light of God, it would split it into different characteristics or different qualities. And among those qualities, one of the chief ones is love. Others are joy and peace and calmness, wisdom, light, sound, and power. But tonight we're talking about the quality of love. So that quality of love is what holds the universe together. In a physical sense, one could say that the quality of love is expressed as gravity, where 2 objects naturally exert a force over each other or toward each other that tries to draw them together. And the closer that those 2 objects are, the more that force of gravity tries to draw them together. Well, that's a kind of a non-conscious expression of love. But the same thing is true of the emotional experience of love. Think of it as a universal force that is drawing everything in the universe together and holding it together. Otherwise, without that force, things would fly apart and become distant and separated from each other. One of the first spiritual experiences I had was a kind of a vision in which, during this experience, I saw as if there were a universal atom, and that universal atom was just beautiful. It was like a soap bubble with all the iridescent colors. But in the center of that was a kind of a spiral shape. I don't know whether my mind had thought of the DNA, the picture of DNA, which at that time was pictured as a spiral shape or not. But at any rate, there was a spiral shape as if a ladder. And that ladder, or that spiral, was beautiful and powerful and filled with light. But most of all, it was the energy of love. And it was that central core of love that held the soap bubble of the atom in its grasp, one might say. And then every atom was made up in that same way, that there was a center to it that was love. And I could see and feel in that experience that everything in the universe, at the core of it, was love. Every particle, every molecule, every cell of our body is made up and held together by this power of love. And so now I'm talking about the universal aspect of love that is there simply because that's the way that God manifests creation, manifests this earth, manifests the planet, manifests us, that at the core of every atom and every thought there is a sense of this power that draws things together and that appreciates and infuses with light every other atom in the universe. But taking it away from an impersonal sense, there's also that same quality within each of us in an emotional sense. And at a soul level, we automatically, because our soul is united with God, our soul, after all, is what we really are. The ego is just the soul that has been confined into what Swamiji called a bundle of self-definitions. And so you take this universal soul, let's say you take, since we're talking about love, you take the quality of God's love expressed by the soul, and so the soul expresses universal love. But the ego, in its bundle of self-definitions, begins to say, well, no, that love isn't universal. After all, I don't love criminals. I don't love people who hate people. I don't love Indian food. Well, I can't say that in India. In America, I could say that. People will say, ooh, I don't like Indian food. So the bundle of self-definitions of the ego, actually, one could say it begins to put little spots where that universal light cannot shine. And it's all a mental concept. See, the light already is shining. Think of love emanating from us to be like the power of the sun that just emanates light and sends it everywhere. It sends it out all around, up, down, left, right, everywhere. But then think of the ego as us going around and putting little spots on the sun, trying to block its power. And so, in that sense, the ego cannot love everyone, because the ego, its almost purpose is to self-define with likes and dislikes. As soon as we're done with our likes and dislikes, as soon as we remove that sense, oh, I don't like this person, therefore I can't love him, as soon as we remove that from everything in life, what Patanjali said is when the vrittis of chittva are neutralized, we automatically realize ourself as our soul again. And so all we're doing in yoga, one might say, is removing our self-imposed blocks of likes and dislikes. Well, we can do that also in terms of personal love. So obviously, in a practical sense, it's not possible to personally make a connection with everyone in this planet. There are over 8 billion people, and you couldn't even think of everyone individually in a lifetime. Your mind doesn't work that quickly. So you can't do it in a physically universal sense, but you can use a symbolic substitute for that. You can love individually everyone that you connect with. And that will be, I don't know, let's say a couple of hundred people. Some people it'll be less, some more. But start with those that are closest to you. Your family, normally. Master said that the reason that friendship was such a beautiful relationship, a beautiful expression of love, is that it is the one relationship that doesn't have any sense of compulsion to it. The one love between two individuals that isn't driven by desire or driven by a kind of creative impulse of a child loving the parent, parent loving the child. Friendship is pure, and it is just the, one might say, harmonic resonance between two egos that recognize that there's a unity between them, and therefore they have this sense of friendship. Well, try to feel that sense of friendship, and behind it, the love of God, this universal love that is expressed in that way. Try to feel that, especially for the people that you're close with, that you come in contact with every day, with your family, with others in the household, with those who are at work, with anyone that you come in contact with on a regular basis. And do it specifically. Try to feel that you are appreciating that person, even if some of their qualities annoy you. See, one of the big mistakes people make is that they say because of a person's actions, I don't love that person. Swamiji always corrected us in that. He said that you can love people without loving their actions. One time when our son was about 3 or 4 years old, we were living in the ashram in San Francisco. And I don't know, he must have been feeling like he had done something bad. Maybe we had corrected him. I don't know what spurred it on. But he came up and said to Swamiji, little 4-year-old, said, "Swamiji, do you love bad people?" He must have been thinking of himself as bad. And Swamiji gave such a beautiful answer. He said, "Yes, I love bad people. I don't always love the bad things that they do." And that satisfied our little son, because he could see then, well, there, I'm loved, even though I did something bad. Well, don't block your love from people because of some action or some behavioral trait or something of their personality that rubs you the wrong way. Probably the reason that they're in your life is to rub you the wrong way, so that you can overcome your tendency to say, well, therefore I don't need to love that person. You need to love everyone. You need to actively love everyone who is in your life, who's been drawn into your life, because that is God in a disguised form who has decided to come into your life. And so you have to love the God in that person in order to overcome the separation that is the driving force that keeps us in delusion. And so the expression of love to everyone is a deeply spiritual practice. Now, one of the questions that people will usually ask is, how can I love people who are evil? Well, Swamiji had a superconscious dream one night, and we actually have a little doily in our meditation room, because in his superconscious dream, he could see behind. He said he saw all kinds of people, criminals and mafiosi and good people and bad people, and he could see behind the personality in this dream, and he realized that everyone in the world is seeking the same thing. They're seeking happiness, they're seeking joy, they're seeking to somehow be fulfilled, and they may define in their actions different ways of expressing that, but they're all seeking the same thing. And so he wrote down that seed thought on this little round doily, because it was the only thing that he could find. But it was that the reason that it was powerful for him, and the reason that he has told that story a number of times, is because it is a powerful spiritual experience to go beyond that which divides us from other people, that which separates us even from those people who do wrong and do evil. We can love everyone in the world, even though we don't necessarily have to love their actions. But we can love everyone and everything, and when we do so, the power of God's love will flow through us and will change us also. Namaste.
I'd also like to share a few thoughts now. You know, there's a statement by the Buddha which is a little daunting, but I think it's good to share in this context, where the Buddha told his followers, you should love everyone, because in one form or incarnation or another, everyone has been dear to you, everyone in the world. So these 8 billion people. And it's an interesting way to approach it, and it's more of a personal way. But we need to understand, and this is what Jyotish has been saying in some ways, that love is not merely a response to other people or other things around us. Love is a quality, it's a capacity that we all have. And if we wait for people or circumstances to be just the way we want them before we give our love or our approval, our acceptance, then we will wait many, many, many lifetimes. But if we just say, I have the capacity to love under all circumstances, then nothing can take that away from you. In this superconscious experience of Swamiji's that Jyotish was referring to, what Swami wrote down on that little, actually a coaster, the kind in hotel rooms where you put a glass on, what he wrote down was, the more bliss I feel, the more I find everyone in the world utterly lovable. And so this is speaking of the capacity to love. And this is a very important concept for us to try to understand. Because in meditation, what we're doing is we're trying to raise the energy up in the subtle astral body from the lower chakras. The lower chakras are about security and sexuality and control. And if we only come from those centers, if someone threatens us, we withdraw inwardly from them. If we have a desire for a person, that colors how we relate to them. If we want to control the universe around us, if people don't behave in a certain way, then we're not pleased with them. But the more we raise that energy up to the higher chakras, and primarily starting with the heart chakra, the more that center of devotion and love is opened up, the more and more it's a capacity, not a response. And we just, willingly or not, our love flows out to everyone. Then I'll share a story before we go up to the higher chakras also. There is a very inspiring saintly woman named Corrie ten Boom. And she and her family were Dutch living in Amsterdam during the Second World War. They were Christian, but they saw the injustice of what the Nazis were doing and taking all the Jews away to concentration camps and killing them. And they tried to help many, many Jews escape, and they were successful in that, hiding them or getting them falsified papers to escape from Nazi-controlled territory. And someone eventually turned them in, and Corrie ten Boom, her sister Betsy, and their elderly father were all put in concentration camps. The father didn't survive long because he was elderly. Betsy and Corrie were young women at the time, and they were beaten and deprived and treated cruelly. And there was one guard in particular that was especially cruel. And finally, Betsy died too. Corrie survived, and she went around the world. And her love her love for God was so strong. That's what enabled her to not become totally darkened and filled with hatred for what she had experienced. And in her later years, she traveled all over the world talking about the love for God. And at one point, in one of the lectures she was giving, a man came up to her afterwards, and he was that guard that had beaten them and treated them with extreme cruelty. And he had seen the error of his ways, and he came, when she first saw him approaching her, she recognized him. And inwardly, this negative response came up. She tried to avoid making contact, but there was no way. And he came up to her and he said, "Can you please forgive me?" And she said, "I felt this wave coming through me. And it wasn't my response. It was God's response. It was the capacity, love, the power of love, which we don't own, which isn't ours to hold back or or give. It just is. And in that moment, she felt this love flowing to that man who had really brought about the death of her beloved sister. And she said it was one of the highlights of my life, because I realized that God's love can flow through all of us, no matter what happens. And this is what we need to remember. If we only say, well, I have this much love and I'll dole it out here and there, then we are diminished. But if we explore the farthest limits of our capacity to love, then we begin to touch the hem of the garment of God's cosmic love, infinite love for all. And then, so if we try to raise the energy up in, just as we did in our guided meditation this morning, bring it to the heart chakra, let that center expand, and so that there is not one person or situation that our love cannot embrace. And then when we bring it up higher in meditation, in our chakras, bring the energy up, is what I should say more clearly. Bring it to the throat chakra, which is the center of peace and calmness. And again, if we can walk, no matter what happens, we're centered in that peace. No one's a threat to us. No one can hurt us. No one can take anything away from us. And then finally bringing it up, bringing the love of the heart chakra up through the center of peace to the kutastha, to the spiritual eye. And then our very thoughts, our very perception of the world around us becomes filled with love and with God's bliss. That's why Swamiji could say, the more bliss I feel, the more I find everyone in the world utterly lovable. And so we need to understand that this capacity is ours. And the more we accept it, the more bliss we feel, the more we feel one with God. There's a beautiful prayer from our Divine Guruji, Paramhansa Yogananda, where he says, resign yourself to the infinite love within you. Such a beautiful concept. So it's not like we have to claw our way with willpower and effort to find that infinite love. We just have to let down the barriers that we put up on our capacity to love and say, I will not put up those barriers. I will resign myself. I will relax into that infinite love within me. Swami has a beautiful song, What is Love? Perhaps you've heard him sing it or the Ananda Choir sing it. But in it, the words are, what is love? Is it only ours? Or does love whisper in the flowers? Surely we, children of this world, could not love by our own powers. And so that's what we need to remember. The power of love is infinite. It is unlimited. It is without definition. And this world we live in right now is so lacking in that love. People are so confused and they're so filled with hatred and revenge and greed and violence. And this quality of love is so needed now in the world. And I urge all of us, whether you're a disciple of Paramhansa Yogananda or not, but if you are seeking higher truth, if you're seeking beyond the shifting sands of this world, the world desperately needs the vibration of love. And it can only be brought to this world. God's love is there. It's infinite. But we have to be the channels for that love. We can't expect God to do it. We have to let Him flow through us. We have to be His words and His hands and His feet to go where that love is needed and to share that love. So can we love? Is it possible to love everyone? I would turn that around and say, the more we feel God's presence, it is impossible not to love everyone, because you see everyone, as Swami saw in his vision, seeking the same things we're seeking the same goals that we're seeking, although confused and doing it in a different way. So I think this topic is so important, and we need to not put it as a question, but put it as a more than an affirmation, as a determination to live our lives in such a way that no one is excluded from our love, and no one is, even those we don't know, that flow of love, that capacity of love is rekindled in this world, and then the world becomes a harmonious place. The climate and all the influence of this planet, which are in such turmoil, it's just because of the negative vibrations in the world. And we ourselves can be channels of that love and of that light if we understand it's always flowing through us, and try not to see the world in terms of this I love and this I don't love, this I accept, this I don't accept. See it only as one thing. God's vibration everywhere. As Master used the beautiful phrase in Autobiography of a Yogi, he said, divine sight is center everywhere, circumference nowhere, meaning that nothing is excluded from that divine sight. Let nothing be excluded from the divine quality of love that you emanate throughout your life. Namaste.